Artificial intelligence in pharma it's really moved beyond just pilots and experiments.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not just about streamlining processes anymore. We're talking about AI making fundamental decisions.
Yeah, in some really critical pathways. I mean, think regulatory affairs, pharmacovigilance, even quality systems.
And the industry has poured billions into these systems, right? They're expecting this huge acceleration, better decision making.
And that speed, that scale, that is exactly where the conflict is emerging. The sources we looked at are crystal clear on this.
Which is?
With all this rapid integration of AI comes this immediate and massive challenge.
Yeah.
The erosion of digital trust.
Right. Pharma has always run on GXP, good practice principles, and validated systems.
Exactly. But now, when an automated conclusion could impact patient safety or a label or a regulatory filing, well, regulators are demanding a level of traceability we've just never seen before.
They want to see the evidence behind every single algorithmic output.
Every single one.
So we've gone from validating a static bit of software to what? Trying to audit a living learning model that can sometimes be a complete black box.
That's the mission for today's deep dive. The fundamental question is, can these dynamic AI systems actually be audited with the same rigor? What evidence, what transparency, what controls do you need to stay compliant now?
It sounds like it's not about having the best AI anymore.
No, it's about proving you understand your AI, proving you can explain why it did what it did, and, crucially, that you can control it when it goes off the rails. It's about governance now, not just the tech.
Welcome to DDReg Knowledge Capsule. Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with why. Why has digital trust suddenly become the #1 regulatory priority?
The sources confirm this isn't, an accident. The scrutiny is really being driven by three big structural shifts in the data ecosystem.
Okay.
First, just the sheer volume and impact of the data. We're dealing with really high-stakes environments.
Like what, for example?
Think about pharmacovigilance databases. These are safety monitoring tools. Or real-time literature intelligence platforms. AI is essential there.
For what? Sorting through everything?
Yeah, for classification, for triaging, for prioritizing thousands of potential adverse events.
And if that AI logic fails or gets corrupted somehow, you're not just looking at a simple data entry error.
No, you're introducing systemic compliance risks. Risks that directly impact patient safety reporting. Maybe even the integrity of a product's label.
The stakes are just too high for a computer says no answer.
Exactly. And that brings us to the second driver, which is this huge regulatory expectation of explainability. That's the key word.
But wait, the industry has always had rules for data integrity. Why does AI demand this whole new level of documentation?
Because traditional validation just checks if the system follows the rules correctly.
If you put X in, you get Y out.
Right. But AI doesn't just follow rules, it generates conclusions.
Oh.
And global authorities, we're talking the EMA and their AI reflection paper, the MHRA, the FDA, they're all hammering on transparency and human oversight.
So a black box model is a non-starter.
Completely. If an AI model that's being used to justify, say, a safety signal is opaque, it just creates unacceptable ambiguity. The regulator needs to understand the why behind the conclusion, not just the what.
That makes perfect sense. I mean, if you can't explain why your system buried a safety signal, you have no justification for your decision.
None.
But the third driver you mentioned really throws a wrench in the works, and that's the dependency on third-party solutions. If explaining your own AI is hard, how on earth do you do it when it's a vendor's black box you didn't even build?
That's the accountability disconnect. It's a huge problem. Internal reg affairs and PV teams, they rely so heavily on external systems.
RAMs, right? Regulatory Information Management Systems.
RIMs, various data processing engines. And the issue is the vendor sells you this complex, often proprietary model, but they give you very little visibility.
Into what?
Into the training data, the algorithmic assumptions, their update cycles.
So the pharma company is totally reliant on this external system, but they're still the ones who are 100% accountable to the regulator.
Yes, the accountability isn't outsourced, even if the technology is. That's a massive, massive blind spot to have during an inspection. The enterprise has to demonstrate that accountability across the entire life cycle, regardless of who wrote the code.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. Because if control is the goal, then our old validation checklists are. They're basically obsolete. The sources lay out 5 critical dimensions that define what AI auditability actually means.
Absolutely. And you should think of this as like the new standard operating procedure for every single algorithm you deploy.
Okay, let's walk through them. First up, Data provenance. This sounds almost like forensic accounting, but for data.
It is, but amplified. Auditors need absolute traceability from end to end.
So it's not just knowing the ingredients.
No, it's documenting where every ingredient came from, how it was handled, the exact logic applied to transform it, the rules for inclusion and exclusion in the training set, every single pre-processing step. You have to prove the data was suitable and had integrity.
That's a huge shift in the documentation burden. Okay, what's number 2?
The second dimension is model governance frameworks. This is about building a quality system around the algorithm itself.
So giving the model an official identity.
Precisely. It has to operate within a defined risk classification.
High risk for safety, low risk for, I don't know, admin tasks.
Exactly. It needs a documented performance profile and, this is critical, robust lifecycle management. So that means strict version control, deviation control, a clear plan for when it gets retired or replaced. It controls the change.
Okay. The third one brings people back into the equation. Evidence of human oversight. This sounds like AI is not allowed to fly the plane solo.
It cannot. Not in the regulated GXP space. For quality, for safety, for filings, AI is a tool. It's like a highly trained co-pilot.
What? It is not the captain.
Never the captain. And the evidence has to show these defined human-in-the-loop checkpoints. You need docs that detail who has the authority to review and override under what specific circumstances and what the accountability structure is if an error gets missed.
The human is still on the hook, full stop.
Full stop.
Right. Which brings us to number 4, and this is usually the biggest hurdle for these complex models. Explainability mechanisms. How do you crack open the black box for an auditor?
Well, you have to build transparency in from the very beginning. The justification for the model's output has to be auditable.
So it's more than just showing the answer.
Much more. Regulators want to see things like feature importance displays. Which data points most influence the decision? They want rule-based layers, transparent confidence scores, some kind of interpretability framework. If you just deploy an opaque neural network with none of that supporting evidence, you're taking on a huge regulatory risk because you can't justify the why.
And finally, the 5th dimension. Operational performance monitoring. A static system you can validate once. You can't do that with AI. Why is this continuous part so vital?
Because AI models degrade. They get worse over time. So continuous monitoring is absolutely mandatory for long-term compliance. This means controls like error rate tracking, outcome deviation assessment. But the really critical new concept here is drift detection.
Drift detection is fascinating. For anyone listening who isn't familiar, can you just quickly explain what model drift is and why regulators care so much about it?
Certainly. So imagine an AI model that was trained to triage adverse event reports using data from, say, 2020. Now, 3 years later, the language physicians use in their reports has subtly changed. Or maybe new drug classes have introduced totally new types of side effects. The model starts seeing data it was never, ever trained on.
It gets confused.
It gets confused. It's like a music app that was great for a couple of years and then suddenly starts recommending music you absolutely hate. The model has drifted from its original successful performance because the real world changed.
And if a pharmacovigilance model drifts,
It could miss a critical safety signal, which is why you need these continuous controls and documented triggers for when to retrain the model. It's non-negotiable.
that makes the whole task sound incredibly complex. So if the requirements are actually laid out this clearly, data, governance, human oversight, explainability, monitoring, why is the market still struggling so much with this? Let's talk about the gaps, the things preventing real audit readiness right now.
Yeah, there are some really significant gaps, practical systemic gaps. The first big one is something we touched on earlier, these unverified vendor claims. They create huge blind spots.
Right. The vendor says, oh, it's validated. They give you a binder of documents. But the team inside the pharma company, they have no way to actually verify it.
Exactly. The internal teams, they often can't get access to the model architecture, or a full description of the training data, or even reliable logs of when the model was changed.
So an inspector comes in and asks you to defend the model.
And you can't. You can't provide the technical file because your vendor holds all the keys, relying on an outside party for your core compliance defense. It's just a recipe for failure.
And that's compounded by the second major gap, right? The fact that we lack AI-specific validation protocols.
Yes. Traditional computerized system validation, CSV, is just not enough. It's insufficient.
Why? What's the problem?
CSV was designed for static, rule-based systems. Systems that do the same thing every single time. AI is dynamic, it learns, it changes. The CSV framework just does not capture these core AI behaviors.
And what are those key behaviors it misses?
Well, model drift, which we just discussed. It often fails to integrate a structured bias assessment.
Making sure the AI isn't accidentally ignoring certain populations because of bad training data?
Right. And it doesn't handle continuous learning or that deep data lineage mapping you need in an AI context. We need a whole new validation paradigm, one that accepts that the model is going to change after you deploy it.
But then you also have this inconsistent internal governance across the industry.
A foundational weakness. Digital maturity is all over the place. Some of the leading companies have these strong central AI governance committees setting standards for the whole enterprise.
And others.
Others have these fragmented structures where, every department is off buying and deploying its own AI tools with totally inconsistent oversight. That fragmentation makes a standard approach to audit readiness pretty much impossible.
And the last piece of the puzzle is that the global regulatory landscape is, well, it's still playing catch-up. There's no real global harmonization.
That's right. While all the agencies share similar principles, they all want explainability. They use different terminology, they have different enforcement criteria, they accept different types of evidence.
Which creates a nightmare for global companies.
It adds tremendous complexity. You might have one validated AI system, but you have to customize the documentation for the US, for Europe, for Asia, just to meet their slightly different standards. It's a huge drain on time and resources.
Okay, let's pivot to the solution. The sources do lay out a pretty clear blueprint for getting ready for these AI audits, a kind of multi-layer governance and documentation architecture. What are the key pieces?
It all starts with understanding your risk. The very first component is establishing an AI system classification framework.
Okay.
This is where you formally define the compliance risk level for every single AI tool you use, based on its function. Right. Is it a high-risk PV safety model? Or is it a low-risk tool for, archiving documents?
And that classification then dictates the level of rigor for everything else.
Exactly right. A high-risk model needs exhaustive documentation.
Which brings us to the second component, and this is probably the most critical one for an auditor. The technical file for every AI model.
That has to be the single source of truth for an audit, right? It's the model's passport. Its resume. It has to include detailed descriptions of the training data, all the assumptions and constraints of the model, the validation results, including those bias checks, and all the explainability artifacts we talked about. And, of course, the plan for monitoring drift. It has to be a living document.
Number 3 gets back to the human element, an integrated human review protocol. This is where the paper trail meets reality.
Yes. Accountability has to be built into the actual workflow. Companies need to formally define the review thresholds.
So at what point does a human have to step in?
Exactly. What confidence score triggers a mandatory human review? What are the exception categories? How do escalations work? And crucially, what training and competency does the reviewer need to have? This is how you prove GXP compliance is actually happening.
And finally, let's circle back to that big third-party problem, transparent vendor governance.
Non-negotiable. This has to be baked into the contracts. You have to demand that your vendors supply auditable documentation. You need transparency on their model updates, their security controls.
You need the contractual right to see the validation document.
Yes, and it bears repeating. The pharma company remains 100% responsible for the output, even if it's an external AI engine making the suggestion.
So what does this all mean when you put it together? The sources seem to suggest that AI can meet these audit standards. It is possible.
It is, but only if the enterprise stops treating AI like some tech experiment and starts treating it like a regulated asset, like a controlled piece of evidence that contributes to patient safety.
The core conclusion, then, is that digital trust isn't just something you get from having cool automation.
No, it emerges from evidence, transparency, and control. Success is going to hinge on investing in these model lifecycle frameworks, building explainability in from the start, and making sure you have that granular data lineage. This proactive governance is what will separate the leaders from the companies facing major compliance problems down the road.
That really leaves a final provocative thought for you to consider. If evidence and transparency are now the global standard, how is the inevitable divergence in what different regulators accept as proof? How is that going to impact a company's ability to use the exact same AI model in the US, in Europe, and in Asia 3 years from now? What kind of internal complexity will you have to build just to harmonize these non-harmonized global expectations? And will that complexity, in the end, actually end up stifling the very innovation everyone is trying to achieve? That's a massive challenge on the horizon for every global compliance officer.